Hi, everyone. This is Peyton DeVita, and
Lydia Dildillian.
thank you for coming to our show. Emma asked us to do a small recording since we were unable to come to the show and talk in person. So this is us doing that.
It's going to be a really great talk.
Yeah, it's not going to be awkward or weird at all. We definitely practiced this a lot. So, yeah. So let's talk about our show a little bit.
Okay. All right. So big thanks to everybody who's coming out too. I just want to say thank you, everyone. Currently, we have a baby in the background. That's the reason we can't be here. There-ish. Yeah, we'll go ahead and just talk about our collaborative practice, the show in general, and hopefully baby doesn't interrupt too much. So all right, so we have a collaborative practice as artists. When we first met, we were really good friends, and we started talking about our art. That's actually how we met in grad school. So,
Conversation started it all. Yeah.
Conversation.
I
So
believe you were sitting on a rock.
I was sitting on a rock.
Yeah.
Inside,
I feel like that.
Inside,
yeah,
yes.
Inside.
That does help. But our first conversation was essentially about the role of space and place, and we were also talking about our shared interests and digital spaces and how that becomes kind of confusing and also a messy space in today's society. So we were kind of thinking about some of those relationships, and that's what kind of started our practice as collaborating artists, and so much more.
Yeah, I think just to define space and place, I know they are basic words, but they do have very specific meanings, especially when they are kind of in context with one another. So a space is somewhere that doesn't necessarily have a lot of historical context or any personal context to you. It's just empty or transient. It could have a lot of potential, but doesn't really have anything quite yet. Where a place is quite the opposite of that. So a place might be your home, right? We think of home as a place. A place might be the university or the gallery that you're standing in currently. A place can really be anything that is ultra specific or that is charged with a lot of material.
Exactly. Something with a specific location or something that you can point to on a map. Whereas space, which I think was very eloquently said, is kind of a non-place in some ways.
So we try to operate, I think, differently between how we do those things, but somewhere in between those two ideas. Whether it's a charged space that has to be picked apart and put back together, or an empty space that needs to be built up to some degree.
Yeah. And I think that actually starts us into another avenue of our creative practice and our collaborative practice together, and that's the editing process. This is actually the biggest part about our collaboration. It's not necessarily that he makes a piece, then I respond to the piece on the same, let's say, canvas or the same image, but rather we have conversations about it, and through the editing process of those conversations, that's actually how we generate a variety of our work. So it's not necessarily like his hand and my hand in the exact same piece, but rather it's an ongoing conversation, and kind of naturally responding to how we work as a team and how we kind of put stuff together.
There's a question there, I think.
Yeah. Put stuff together.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. We have done work in the past where we do put our hands in the same space.
Yes.
But that has happened once, I think.
No, it's happened more than that.
Okay, a couple times.
Yeah.
So what it typically means for me, and maybe you can explain yours after, typically means for me is I might make a piece or make a draft of a piece, and I primarily work with photographs and collage, so digital collage. So I might make a draft of a piece, and I'm like, this is looking pretty good.
Yeah,
it's looking pretty. I gotta get Lydia's take on this. And she'll come in and she'll do, if any of her students are in there, she's like, that's a choice. And that's when I know I need to trash it and start over. So, I mean, that's a good feedback loop, right? So I'll make a piece several times so we get back into that idea of building up a space or recharging or deconstructing a space over and over again. And that is part of the editing process for us. So it starts as that conversation. She's like, well, why are you using, this specific, field next to this specific arrangement of trees or whatever it might be? That's very generalized, but so it'll start those conversations and it'll start to get a lot more personal. It'll turn a space into a place, or it might take a place and make it a non-space. So it's always kind of in conjunction with moving things around and changing the context of something or introducing new context.
Yeah. So that was really nicely put.
Yeah.
So So I think the editing process is kind of unique to our practice, and I think editing is actually a really, really big part of our work that we don't talk about that much, surprisingly.
No, not really.
And I think that's kind of where most of the magic happens. It's in the realm of the conversation. It's in the realm of the edits and the multiple editions of, or iterations rather, of how something's being put together. And I think that kind of idea of how time is transforming a space into a place becomes a really, really important dialogue and jumping off point for us to make the body of work that you're currently seeing in the gallery. I think, too, both of our practices have some really interesting kind of nuances, and also have kind of different approaches in the sense that we think about things in a very analog and then digital kind of way. My practice has a lot more analog kind of adaptations in it. I'm working with traditional mediums like painting and drawing as a base line or kind of a starting point to jump into. And then often I will turn to more digital processes midway through. And I think Peyton kind of has the opposite practice, where he starts off with a digital kind of platform to begin and build off of that. And then he might turn to more analog kind of drawings midway through for sketching and kind of that kind of intermediate edit, I guess you could say.
Yeah, just to clarify that, like I'll take a photograph, or it's more accurately a couple dozen photographs, meld them together, collage them together, and then I'll start making marks on top of them. Sometimes those marks are physical marks with a tool in my hand. Other times it is a more digital mark with a brush in Photoshop. But there is, the hand inserted into the space, I think, is consistent between both our works.
Correct. Yeah. So, no, I think that's a good way to say it too.
Let's talk about, or can we talk about?
Yeah.
Image selection.
Ooh, image selection.
I think that's something we both do frequently, but maybe in a slightly different way.
Yeah. What attracts me to an image versus what attracts Peyton to an image, I think, is really, really different. I think for me, it starts off with maybe kind of a gut feeling. It's a little bit more organic, maybe, which I always kind of hate saying that in some ways because it sounds really vague.
Organic.
But I think when I'm starting off with a space, I look for like compositional devices first. How can I walk into a space? And I think as a painter, somebody who's grown up in a Western canon of painting, I kind of grew up with foundations of Hudson River Valley painters and these kind of ideas of how we enter into a space through traditional linear perspective. So, and that kind of, I think those kind of notions kind of built up a kind of atmosphere on how I negotiate paintings and how I negotiate a composition for the viewer. And of course, too, with education and with exposure to other kinds of image making and space making, different than Western perspective, that kind of radically shifted the way I think about a space being created and how I can change that kind of platform. So a lot of the work that you're seeing in particular, that I kind of have my paintings and things like that are in the space, that of course have been bouncing back into conversation with Peyton and things like that, have this kind of very flat aesthetic where it's very much about texture and it's very much surface engagement, where you're not necessarily entering into a space, but rather you're kind of existing on the surface, and the viewer is very detached in some ways, but also maybe a little bit more into the work on a surface engagement, meaning that they're kind of exploring their own kind of nooks and valleys and crevices as the paint kind of is sitting on top, or the texture, or there's shimmer, or there's some kind of odd material that's being added that gives the painting kind of otherness in some other kind of way. Versus there's a variety of different paintings in the space where you have very photographic imagery that has paint layers on top of it. So those kind of two paintings are existing simultaneously together, and I think for me, when I'm selecting images, it's about not only how we can enter into a space, but how we exist with work in space. So going back to that idea of space and place, it kind of has this, like, I don't know, I don't want to say organic again.
Just say it.
But it has this kind of like duality too. I'm not doing it. But it has this kind of duality too, in terms of like how I'm thinking about space and place conceptually building up, but also how that exists for the viewer and how they're engaging in the work physically in the actual space when they're viewing the pieces too.
Would you also say that you plan most of your work pretty heavily?
Yeah, I do. There's a lot more planning, I think, in some ways, in my work than there is yours. Like, I get really fuss budgety about mine. I get kind of control freaky about mine. I know it's terrible, but I think that this is also kind of the nice portion about this too, is those paintings that have a lot more grit to them. Mm-hmm. They're not necessarily a space where you walk into them and there's like an image of like a landscape, but rather they're more texture paintings. Those paintings really bring me out of my comfort zone, and I think that that's personally really good for me, because sometimes, like I said, I just get so fuss budgety and nitpicky about how I'm controlling them, and the sketching process, the image process that I do on Photoshop beforehand. I mean, there's just like a lot of like backlog of information mm-hmm. when it takes me, quite a while to finish more realistic images, but like I said, those textured paintings really help kind of break me out of the mold some.
Nice.
How describe, since we're doing questions now, describe how you select images.
I would say not planned at all, really.
Mm-hmm.
I very much go with the flow, figure it out as it happens. Mm-hmm. And I think responding to things is a big part of my practice.
Yeah.
I think I often say that serendipity is what I follow around. That's quite a bit.
Yeah.
I let things happen to me, and
mm-hmm.
I let things happen in front of me, and then I respond to those things. Even in terms of how I gather images, I don't go out and set to like, I'm going to go make this photograph. Typically I'll take a long break between making images, and then we'll go on a trip, or we'll go visit friends, or we'll have a really slow weekend. It'll be a great period of time, and then a really big kind of binge of collecting or making imagery. So I might go several months without picking up the camera and making a photograph, but then I might photograph for 2 or 3 weeks straight and make 10,000 images.
I see that quite a bit.
So again, there's no planning it. It's just kind of like, oh, this is catching my eye. The light looks a little different here. Mm-hmm. This is really happening, or it could be a fundamental change in my life in general. Again, it's responding to things happening. Mm-hmm. So same thing goes with image selection there. Lydia constantly is looking through catalogs of images. Like, where do you pick an image? How do you pick an image? And I go through and I'm like, well, this is fun. This is interesting. I like this person's face, or like there's this really cool kind of U shape down here. And she's like, yeah, but like, what about the rest? Like, I'm not going to use the rest of it. So I'm not going out and making a photograph, right? And I think in the statement I do mention that a little bit, right? It's no longer about the photograph. It's about a photograph. Mm-hmm. So there's multiples of a thing. So it might be a collage eventually of a single place or a single space, mm-hmm. But it's 20 images of that place from different angles, different perspectives, different times of day, maybe even different years, mm-hmm. Coming together to make a new moment or a new reaction or a new feeling in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Something organic.
You gotta stop.
So yeah, I think, versus your like intense planning and mm-hmm. heavy amounts of control, I very much allow serendipity to play a big role and be, well, let's see where these images go. And that's where you come in and have those conversations with me, like, well, maybe you should do a little bit more control. We look at some images together, like, well, this could be really interesting there, and then we have a conversation on why that is something that didn't even cross my mind, right? Mm-hmm. So those conversations are extremely helpful in terms of following that path of serendipity. The same way I think I throw a wrench in your plans sometimes. I'm like, well, why'd you even put that smiley face in there? That's ridiculous.
And I think, once again, like going back to why we wanted to do this show, and we haven't done a collaborative exhibition in like 5 or 6 years.
2017,
Oh,
2018?
maybe more than that. Yeah. So a little bit more than that. But we were really excited to have this opportunity, just because we've been having these conversations, and we've been in dialogue about the role of digital spaces mm-hmm. versus these analog kind of realities that we exist in, mm-hmm. and this kind of and of course we can get very theoretical here, but we'll keep it simple for this.
good.
But if you have more questions, feel free to shoot us emails,
Please.
and we will write you back all the things.
Find Emma Hitzman somewhere in the room, and she can hook you up with us.
She can hook you up with us. So, but we've been having these really wonderful conversations and really rich dynamic conversations about all of these different avenues about digital spaces, physical places, and what they mean to us. But also too, it's our personal experience and how we interpret that kind of information and dialogue. And we do have a lot in common. Obviously, we're husband and wife, so there's obviously a lot of things that we do have in common. But there's also maybe a little bit, but there's also a lot of things that we're very, very different artists with. And so, like, my process and my practice, and I think that was really wonderfully put by Peyton. He has a polar opposite practice than me. I have to work at least once a week in my studio, and I'm constantly looking at images, and I need to digest things constantly for me to have. I just need to have things in the background for me to make work. And Peyton doesn't need that. He gets inspired by a specific activity and a location, and you're very, very much that kind of fosters your growth and exploration in a topic. Yeah. So the way we explore space and the way we kind of think about how we're putting images together is vastly different, and our studio practice is vastly different. So I think it's really conversely very good that when we go in to have a project like this where we're setting up a goal for ourselves to work collaboratively, that we sit down, we have this kind of idea that we start bouncing back and forth. It does happen organically. That's going to be, maybe that should have been the title of the show. But we keep having these ongoing conversations, but it's also really good because we are two very different artists, and so he throws a wrench in my plan and I try to tighten him up. So that kind of reverberation back and forth kind of aligns us in a really kind of nice trajectory. So
we've been talking for about 16 minutes, so I think we should stop. Yeah,
that's probably fair. Okay, if you do have any other questions on the work, the processes used, some of the theoretical background that we're kind of pulling from, if you're interested in some of the books that we're reading, or some of the content which we've engaged in a little bit deeper ways, feel free to reach out to us via email. We would love to talk to you. We'd love to give you all the information and answer your questions as needed. Once again, we're really, really sorry that we couldn't make it in person. I'm still recovering from baby being here, so
I'm fully recovered.
Yes,
so.
Peyton's fully recovered. So, but this is all on me. I couldn't leave. So, anyways, but we really appreciate all of you all coming to our show, watching this 18 minute long video. Yep. So feel free to contact Emma Hitzman to get a hold of us, or get our emails, and we will write you back.
Thank yous.
Thank yous.
Thank yous. I want to thank you.
Yes, and I want to thank you.
Really good job there.
Yep.
Solid. I think the biggest thank you probably going out to Emma Hitzman,
yes.
curating the show, working with us. I think we are probably one of the worst artists that she's worked with because of our inconsistency in contact.
Yes.
To be fair, she was pregnant. She did give birth recently, so
just 2 weeks ago.
That's her excuse. I don't really have one, so. But really, thank you, Emma, for dealing with us and making this show happen.
Yes.
I want to also point out that Emma arranged pretty much the entire show.
She did a
herself,
fabulous job,
and I freaking love it.
Yeah.
So really great job there. So make sure you give her thanks if we don't give enough of it.
Yes. And also make sure to talk to your curator, Emma Hitzman, about gallery install and things like that, because she's absolutely fabulous at what she does. She's totally brilliant. She undersells herself all the time, but she's absolutely brilliant. So yeah. Anyways, a big thank you to also former students. I miss you guys terribly. Former faculty, we also miss you terribly. We hope you're doing well. We send our love and all of that good stuff.
Shout out to Kobe and Sarah. Love you. Miss you guys. Sending good vibes.
Sending good vibes. All right. Thank you so much. Once again, feel free to email us if you have questions. Thanks so much. Bye.